Welcome everyone to the On the Town Commercial EV Charging webinar. Thank you for joining. My name is Courtney Chin. I'm the Residential Energy Specialist for Arlington County. Jenna Peabody, our Energy Programs Outreach Specialist, is also on from the AIRE team today. This is the second webinar in the Think Big EV Road Trip virtual series hosted by the Arlington Initiative to Rethink Energy, or AIRE team, within Arlington County. Before I hand it over to our first speaker, I want to provide a quick update. By the end of this year, the county will complete the draft Carbon Neutral Transportation Master Plan. This plan includes an extensive focus on the use of public access, public use charging infrastructure in order to give momentum to a market transformation from ICE vehicles to EVs over the next decade. In Arlington, however, space constraints, especially in the right-of-way, are a challenge. This market-facing EVSE network includes charging stations on public access, public use sites at government facilities, such as open lots at the government center, libraries, community centers, and parks. That work is already in progress. In concept, this network also includes public-private partnerships, such as grocery store and other retail lots, and possibly lots at schools and places of worship, as well as neighborhood charging solutions to our space constraints and residential homes that do not have garages or driveways. If you have any questions related to the Carbon Neutral Transportation Master Plan, please reach out to us at the Rethink Energy team. We're happy to answer your questions. We will provide our email in the chat. So today we are all about commercial and multifamily EV charging, and our three great speakers will share their experience and knowledge on EVs. As a reminder, this event will be recorded and later published to the AIRE webpage and shared with all attendees via email. Attendees will also receive the slides that will be presented and some additional resources related to owning and driving an EV. Attendees will have their microphones and cameras off during this webinar, but please do type in questions to the speakers into the Q&A, which can be found at the top of your Teams screen. If you have any technical difficulties, please use the chat section to relay your issue, and our team will do their best to help. For our speakers today, we have Jules Kunkel from MetLife Investment Management, Brandon Oldham from EV Noir speaking on Charge at Work, and Alan Harned from Virginia Clean Cities. So, to get us started this afternoon, I will hand it over to Jules.
Thanks, Courtney. Hello, good afternoon to everyone that's here. And I'm really looking forward to discussing the approach that MetLife Investment Management has had in considering EV charging stations throughout our commercial real estate portfolio. So if you want to go to the next slide, Courtney. So just to give you a little bit of a background on MetLife Investment Management. So we are the institutional asset management business of MetLife Inc. So you maybe have heard of MetLife via insurance, or maybe you're like a Giants or a Jets fan and see that they play in MetLife Stadium. I focus on the real estate portfolio that we have under MetLife Investment Management, and that includes real estate debt, equity, and agricultural debt as well too. What we have committed to thus far as part of our decarbonization initiatives has been in alignment with Department of Energy's Better Climate Challenge program and the Urban Land Institute's Greenprint Net Zero framework. So we have committed to a 50% reduction in scope 1 and 2 emissions by 2030, and that's from a 2019 baseline. And then a few other initiatives we're involved in as well include the EPA. We're a partner with them for Energy Star Partner of the Year. And then we've also been involved as in addition to the DOE Better Climate Challenge, the Better Buildings Challenge as well. We're Fitwell champions, and we also have Green Lease leader recognition with tenants in collaborating on green leases with tenants in our portfolio. So if you want to go to the next slide, Courtney. So what I'll talk about today is why we're focused on EV charging throughout our portfolio. I'll really focus mainly on our equity portfolio because that's where we have the ability to make more decisions and where we have operational control over our properties as well. Throughout the United States, we have an equity portfolio of about 250 properties, and it includes everything from office buildings, multifamily, retail, hotels, industrial. I think that kind of hits a lot of the big ones. And what we have found, especially over the last few years, is that there's been a great demand in EV charging stations and a desire to have them, not just because of ESG, and ESG stands for environmental social governance. So not just for ESG initiatives or sustainability initiatives, but also as a tenant amenity we found in a lot of properties as well too. And what we've seen too is that we think that we're only kind of at the starting point, and that the demand for EV charging stations in buildings is only going to continue to grow and grow more and more. So actually, according to Bloomberg, there are 20 million EVs in the world today, and that's up from just 1 million only 4 years ago. And in the same article, Bloomberg had predicted that 71 million plug-in vehicles will be on the road by 2025. So this is certainly a trend that is not going to be ending anytime soon. So real estate owners who lay the groundwork now to offer EV charging services can differentiate their properties and secure competitive advantage when EVs become the new norm over time too. And there have been a lot of benefits to us in having EVs in our properties. Higher occupancies, we can that sometimes charge higher rents. Uh, Also, it helps to improve asset values, and it helps with sustainability goals, among other things as well. Next slide. So when determining if a property is appropriate to have EV charging stations, there are a lot of things that we have to consider. And there are sometimes things that are not even in our own control. So maybe we have to consider the charging needs of those at a property, both now, but also future proofing too. As well as charging station types. In the next slide, that I have a little bit more details as to what kinds of charging stations maybe make the most sense right now for certain asset types. There's level 2 DC fast charging, and then also DC heavy duty plugins. DC heavy duty plugins, we really only right now are looking at maybe for industrial properties where there are fleet vehicles or a lot of delivery vehicles, such as like if there's like an Amazon warehouse or something like that, that's constantly having a lot of Class 8 vehicles that might need to charge. But we're only thinking about those right now. But we also have to think about things like cost, operations and maintenance. Who's going to ensure that these charging stations are operating well? If a system is networked or not, user experience. But a big one that's really important too is also collaboration with the utility. Do we need to add a transformer to a property? Is a property right now EV ready necessarily? Is it equipped to be able to support EV infrastructure? So those are all different things that have to be considered and scoped when we're deciding to add EV charging equipment. We found that at times, if a property maybe is not necessarily EV ready, because maybe it does need a new transformer, needs different wiring on site, we found that it can even sometimes cost more just to make a property EV ready than to actually add charging infrastructure itself. Sometimes it's as high as like a 70-30, 70% is spent on making a property ready versus 30% on the actual equipment itself. Um, so on the next slide, I talk a little bit here about the different kinds of EV charging infrastructure that we have found to be most successful at certain property types right now. At office buildings and multifamily buildings, especially because typically we find that folks might be there for longer periods of time. Maybe they're there for an 8-hour 9 to 5 period, or folks obviously at a multifamily building are sleeping overnight. A level 2 charging station can be really the best solution in those cases. They don't require as much infrastructure to have them installed, and the charging times for them last a little bit longer, but that's okay in most cases. Retail centers, level 2 work, especially for shift workers, but DC fast chargers can also be a really great amenity to have at retail centers, and that's largely because maybe for instance, there's a shopping center that has a Wegmans, and while someone is going grocery shopping, they want to charge their vehicle. They won't, if it's a level 2 charger, they won't necessarily get a full charge during that shopping experience. But if it's a DC fast charging station, they can get a lot closer. Hotels, level 2 is typically a good solution too. You can charge overnight. And we have to think too, in those cases, about managed charging in order to meet the guest experience in hotels as well. And then I kind of mentioned on the last slide, for industrial, level 2 can work for folks who are shift workers, but for delivery and fleet vehicles, we need to start thinking more about DC fast charging, or even future infrastructure as well. And then on the next slide, so something that we have to think about too. So within the MetLife Investment Management portfolio, we have a lot of buildings that are existing, as well as buildings that are under construction and under development too. So we want to make sure that we're making right decisions at the start in order to make these properties EV ready. So right now, we've been getting a little bit of guidance from some of the third-party property management teams that we work with to understand how should we make sure that buildings are ready to support future needs. So a good breakdown that we have found is that if at least 5% of the existing parking spaces are equipped with existing EV infrastructure, that's usually a good start. And then we want to have at least 15% of them be able to support future EV charging stations, because they already have the conduit in place, the breaker boxes, the wires, that kind of stuff. But then we would ideally like that at least 80% of the parking spots are EV capable. So we have transformers and other things like that right sized on site to be able to support that kind of future infrastructure. And then, as I mentioned too, communication with the utilities is really key and really important. So as we're scoping a site to ensure that it can equip, or that it is equipped to meet future needs, we want to be able to talk to the utility about that too, and make sure that they're on the same page that we are on as well. So next slide. So in addition to ensuring that we have the right kinds of infrastructure on site, we have to think about what kinds of connectivity is available for properties as well. So in a lot of cases, Wi-Fi is a really good solution. A lot of folks have smartphones these days. So that can be a great option. It's fast and it's less expensive than cellular. In some cases, cellular though might be the best option too. It can have a limitless range. It doesn't require a router, so it can be an easier install. So those are two things that we want to weigh a bit more. The one thing that we found for below grade parking garages, sometimes cellular can be a little bit more challenging because it might be tough to get connectivity in those kind of locations. And then we also have looked as well at hardwired Ethernet and proprietary options, but typically Wi-Fi and cellular are the two options we've landed on. And then next slide. And then in terms of ownership of the systems too, every property has kind of been a little bit different. So we really try to weigh the pros and cons on a per property basis. In some cases, we might solely own a system. We might use the property owned approach. In some cases, there might be a hybrid approach. There could be charging as a service or supplier owned. So if you're scoping EV equipment at your property, I would encourage you to kind of think about all four of these options really, and talk about that with your the broker or the sales team that you're working with to see what makes the most sense for you at your site. And then next slide. Um, Something too that's really important for us, especially right now, we're in the process of doing our capital plans at all of our properties, and looking at available rebate and grant opportunities has been key. US Department of Energy has a really great resource available where you can look at any property and be able to find out about maybe local incentives or grant opportunities. We've also been following really closely to any funding opportunities that have been available as a result of either the IIJA, the infrastructure bill, or as a result of AIRE, the Inflation Reduction Act, with a 30C tax credit. So that can vary per property. Some properties have a tax credit appetite and some don't. But if your property is eligible to take advantage of a tax credit, it's a really great way to reduce the costs of installing EV infrastructure. And then lastly, I'll just end on this slide about future considerations. So while I mentioned that we really want to meet our tenant needs in order to make our properties have this kind of equipment, we also have to think too about policies in different locations. There's a national proposed rule that this hasn't gone into effect yet, but it's been proposed that 60% of 2030 models and 2/3 of 2032 models sold nationwide should be zero emission vehicles. So clearly, if that were to be a real rule, then properties would need to be equipped to support those kinds of vehicles in the future. And then not only that, not only with kind of federal commitments or other things like that, a lot of vehicle manufacturers have committed by certain years to have all or a portion of their vehicles be all electric vehicles or some sort of hybrid. So we're going to see the continued push on both sides. So we're trying to equip our buildings right now to be ready for that shift in the future. So that is all I have, and I will pass it on to the next speaker.
Thank you so much, Jules. I think this was a really great snapshot into the planning and decision-making process behind commercial buildings and multifamily buildings installing EVSEs. So thank you for that that outlook there. And yep, Brandon is going to start us, and he's going to talk about workplace charging and charge at work.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Brandon. I'm with EV Noir, and I help lead infrastructure and EV solutions there. And I'm very excited to introduce Charge at Work. It's a new EV workplace charging program that we like to call your workplace charging concierge. So forecasts for electric vehicle sales in the United States say that EVs will reach 40 to 50% of total passenger car sales by 2030. And these aren't just projections. We are seeing the proof of these growth estimates today. EV registrations in the US rose 60% in the first quarter of 2022, even as the overall market was down nearly 20% over the same period. So why workplace charging specifically? Workplace charging is so important because 74% of current EV owners express strong interest in workplace charging. At the same time, 60% of EV drivers need chargers at work, either because of long commutes or no access to at-home charging. So workplace charging can help bridge an important gap between what people want, EVs, and are interested in, and what they need, which is a place to charge. And then can you go to the, sorry, yeah, this is good. So let's talk about the number of benefits at the EV charging workplace. So when you have EV charging at the workplace, there's a number of benefits that happen, not just limited to the workplace. You have happier employees who want to stay with your company. So pretty soon, workplace charging will be an expected amenity with the EV growth and adoption, and it won't be seen as just a perk. A smaller company carbon footprint that may help you meet company sustainability goals and qualify for certain certifications or benefits. Companies that lead on sustainability and conservation often enjoy those reputations for having smart community-driven leadership. Plus, workplace charging helps put more EVs on the road because it gives workers a guaranteed place to charge and more comfort knowing where they can charge. Plus, more EVs means healthier air and a cleaner local community. Plus, EVs should be accessible to all, not just workers who have a dedicated charging space at home. So with workplace charging, workplaces can support energy justice and equity for workers who live in apartments or condos, or just do not have access to level 2 or even level 1 charging at their home. Something a little bit more specific to the local market is that in Virginia alone, by 2030, it's projected to have 500,000 EVs on the roads in Virginia. And these are early estimates, so some of these projections are even higher than this. Plus, there's been $15 billion of federal government funding for EV charging infrastructure dedicated over the next 5 years. So there's a lot of projected growth of EVs into the future. And with that background and like seeing the need for EV charging at work, happy to explain more about what Charge at Work is and how we can help you. So we are a U.S. Department of Energy funded national workplace charging acceleration program. We can help in terms of education. We can walk you through what creating a workplace charging plan looks like. We inform you about incentives for workplace EV charging, and we can help you figure out the number of chargers you can need in 5 years or even much more. So we also can provide technical assistance. What kind of chargers do you need? We can help. How much will all these chargers cost? What does it look like to project manage one of these installations? We can help you figure that out too. And we're also creating online tools that supports you through this process. So launching later this year, we have a full program website that will contain a special project builder and a resource center. So we want to be clear that we are focused only on workplace charging solutions designed for use by workers at the workplace, not fleet charging solutions. If you have needs or questions there, we'll have a number of contacts that we can also point you to within CalSTAR or even at EV Noir. And the chargers that will most often be used in these workplaces will be the level 2 chargers that were mentioned earlier. So not DC fast chargers or fast chargers focused on medium or heavy duty options. Now, to give you a peek of the project builder and what the website will look like as it launches later this year, this is a quick preview of the project builder. This is dashboard. You'll see all kinds of data related to your project. And again, on the website, there'll be a number of resources that help you know what incentives exist in your local area or what options exist for charging stations. And next slide, please. These are just some run-throughs and examples of what you'll see on the website. So with this cost worksheet, for example, you'll have careful planning, which is integral to getting a successful workplace charging program up and running. So you can actually use the project builder as a resource to understand the costs, select the number of chargers you would need, evaluate what incentives due to the project, and basically understand the costs over the full project and time period of use. Next slide, please. And this is also an early look at the project planner. So like I was mentioning early, if you deploy a charging installation project at work, it is a project that spans a number of months and a good time period. So there's a number of different stages and milestones that you want to track and documents that you want to keep track of for incentives and various aspects. So while you're working with the city and the authorities that have jurisdiction for permitting and the construction team, you can use the project planner as your one-stop shop to track where those milestones are, keep important documents, and basically understand the project step by step. And so where all that comes in handy is because there's a whole team at the Charge at Work Resource Center behind the scenes that can help with technical assistance, guiding you through your workplace. So as you use the project builder and upload documents and use the tool, there's a whole team of support that can help with technical assistance, answer more specific questions that might be unique to your specific workplace as you're working with the teams internally or the construction management company that's installing the chargers. And one thing I want to really recommend and emphasize today is that as we move to formally launch the Charge at Work program, we want to work with you to make workplace charging a reality. So we'd love to collaborate. If this sounds interesting or exciting, please go to the website now and you can sign the pledge. It's a non-binding pledge and it basically shows that you are committed or interested in deploying charging infrastructure at work. That's going to be the first signal to get into the system with Charge at Work, send a signal to our team. We can understand, and when we launch the full website later on in the future, we'll be able to follow up, reach out to you, understand what your needs are, where you're at, direct you to resources, and answer more specific questions that are applicable to you. And with that, I just want to say thank you and happy to answer any questions at the end.
Thanks, Brandon. I know that presentation was specific to Charge at Work, but I think there's a lot of great information in there for anyone at any stage of looking into the process of workplace charging. So, yep, do look into those resources. We will provide his contact information at the end as well, along with all the speakers. And now to round us off, we have Alan Harned from Virginia Clean Cities.
Hey, thank you so much. And I really appreciate that Arlington is pulling everybody together in the community for this. This is a critically important subject, and it also showcases the leadership, the municipal leadership, the community leadership, the societal leadership, kind of working together on these key initiatives. And so I'm Alan Harned. I'm with Virginia Clean Cities. We're a vehicle and technologies program. Next slide. Calling in from Harrisonburg, Virginia, but we also have a Clean Cities program nationwide and a Greater Washington, D.C. Clean Cities program. And so next slide, Clean Cities works to reduce petroleum consumption, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and to reduce dependence on imported petroleum, and is aligned with the U.S. Department of Energy, where the federal government launched this program in 1993. Virginia Clean Cities has been operating since 1996, reducing emissions with government, industry, and academia. Next slide. And just a note that if you're calling in from outside of Arlington, there are Clean Cities coalitions all over the place, constantly working to service communities, advance hundreds of thousands of alternative fuel vehicles and stations. And so we track the vehicles and the stations and the laws. A lot of the alternative fuel data center tools are supported also by Clean Cities coalitions on the ground. Next slide. And just the scope and scale of this is that our transportation infrastructure and our transportation world does not need to operate on $3 a gallon gasoline. Electric vehicles represent Virginia energy. They represent a net zero fuel pathway that is right now about 5 times cleaner than gasoline, but soon will be, can be fully decarbonized. And there are many people who have made those adjustments in their homes or in their power purchase items. But the Clean Cities program also would encourage all, I encourage every corporation to consider other ways to reduce your footprint. If an electric vehicle doesn't seem like it's for you today, you can work on biodiesel and renewable diesel, or if you've got a yellow gas cap on your work trucks, you can consider ethanol and other biofuels. These all help improve our economy, and a lot of the details for each of these are on the Alternative Fuel Data Center. I'll also just hype and emphasize that there is an electric vehicle journey also for e-bikes. So to be sure, as we're talking about charging for your employees, that we have some infrastructure for their bikes or their e-bikes, and then also transit options. Next slide. So just a basic of electric vehicles. These have been on the marketplace in the United States for more than a decade. I'm on my second EV. I gave up gasoline in 2013. And these vehicles to a range store electrical energy in a large traction motor in the vehicle. There are also some types of electric vehicles called plug-in hybrid vehicles that maintain a gas backup energy source. Interestingly enough, those are going to really need more level 2 chargers because their electric range is shorter. So there is some considerations for that if you're seeing a lot of hybrids versus a lot of electric vehicles with your employees. Oftentimes the smaller range for a plug-in hybrid vehicle would require it to be charged more frequently to cover that. Zero tailpipe emissions, but there may be air pollution through electricity generation. So there's also a space here in all these federal bills for renewable energy generation at workplaces and throughout the communities. And then these vehicles do have a driving range up from about 100 miles to 400 miles, and 500-mile vehicles are on the way in the model years ahead. So the plug-in hybrids do have that shorter range. Next slide. And this is just a echo of what others have said about the light duty vehicles increasing in availability, but also increasing in sales in the United States. This is a chart that is not meant to be read, but it is meant to symbolize that there are a lot of different makes and models of vehicles, and then there are some that sell in pretty hefty volumes, but that we're on a curve upwards in electric vehicle sales. EVs, plug-in hybrids, and electric vehicles are widely available in the region, particularly with access to Maryland, which had been an early ZEV state. But in Virginia, starting on January 1st, there will be a larger rollout and availability of electric vehicles as vehicle sales goals. That goal box is checked in the Commonwealth of Virginia. That will mean that these vehicles will be available at Virginia dealers, and you won't have to travel to Maryland to buy as many of the vehicles from dealers. New models are also rolling out nationwide with better battery chemistry or longer range or fancier self-driving features. So there's all sorts of good times ahead. Next slide. And I'm not going to dwell too much on this other than there's level 1 charging, level 2 charging, and DC fast charging. And I will mention that there's a chance to do an employee survey. And if your employees would be adequately served with 5 miles of range per hour of charging, you may be able to service some of your employees with level 1 charging, which is a regular dedicated outlet, just a 110 volt regular outlet that would be accessible and undamaged. So we actually have talked about this a couple times in the other speakers. So I'm just going to keep going. The next slide. with just a note. I wanted to echo what was said with MetLife. It was really great to hear the dialogue about 5% electric, 15% ready, and then moving to 80% plans in the future. And so this is just a case study of the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in Colorado, in Golden, Colorado, with charging infrastructure, installing 108 level 2 charging stations, but with a power management system that would allow some of those chargers to be turned on and off in different sequences. The maximum charger output that they did for all their Denver area commuting employees was a 6 or 7 kilowatt charger, which is a standard 40 amp level 2 charger. So just an example of scaling up while also balancing the power with a charge management system, essentially clocks on those chargers. Next slide. And another quick example is some other site and commercial examples. So down in Ashland, Virginia, the municipality took advantage of federal funding that we have available right now for green spot visible hub chargers. And so this was an example with that Tesla on the top of a quick install that was federally supported and partner supported. Some of the site items that you'll think about is how fast you would like your visitors or your employees to charge. And then another question would be how much revenue recovery you desire. And it was really great that MetLife talked about those components of Wi-Fi, cell phones, etc. And I think with cell phones, I would just add one more caveat that you would consider if you know that the cell phone signals might change. So in about a decade, the signals are probably going to change as we go from 5G to 6G or something. Just to remember that you may need to replace a module as those cell phones get replaced. Some great examples would be all this green signage, these stickers to make the units visible to guests, cable management to try to keep the cables from being driven over, and then publishing public stations with network capabilities so that if your customers need to know about them, or at least communicating internally so that people don't park in front of them if once you've got them installed for your electric vehicle operators. Wanted to emphasize there's some incentives with the federal tax credit and NEVI. Those were already previously mentioned, but I do want to emphasize that Dominion Energy now has a turnkey program. It is about a year old, but it's brand new out the door. Some of the rules just got published in the recent weeks, and there are also other programs, all detailed on the Alternative Fuel Data Center Laws and Incentives page, or on Virginia Clean Cities website as well. But if you go to the next slide, I'm going to just go briefly into a few of those, which is there is a 30% tax credit. And to emphasize, you'll want to follow IRS guidance and track those locations. Some of those IRS details take a little bit of time, so just plan to go back to visit them if you need more information. There are also the clean fuel funding through the Department of Transportation, and the example would be there should be another $400–500 million next year. So this could be a great space for buildings and businesses and partners to ask Arlington or other COG, DC Council of Governments, to lead grant applications for these federally compliant chargers. Last year was a $700 million proposal. DC COG did get in for one of those proposals. There are also other federal grant programs. There's about $100 billion in clean energy transition. These grants are flying back and forth through the federal agencies between DOT, Department of Energy, HUD, and other entities like the EPA. And so these grants are hard to acquire, but good ideas often bring forward partnerships or good other spaces for collaboration. So a lot of the funding also targets rural and disadvantaged communities. So if it might not be for you, but it might be for some of your customers or other collaborators. And then there's other federal partnerships. So I do want to sell that we do have a federal grant trying to do some level 2 charger hubs that would be visible in Virginia, DC, Maryland, under the Mid-Atlantic Electrification Partnership. I do want to recognize EV Noir is our primary outreach partner for that federal program, but Joe DeSimone at GreenSpot would be, if you just want someone to handle your chargers for you, that would be a space. I want to emphasize in the area that Pepco is trying to deploy 12 fast chargers for taxis. So there might be a space to partner with Pepco for some of those taxis. I want to mention that Dominion Energy in the area has a utility program that offers turnkey installations and up to 50% of the upfront costs covered, but also for disadvantaged site hosts, about 10% of their work they intend to give for free. They want to cover 100% of those costs. And so the link there might be for some of their home programs, but those Dominion programs are live. And then I'll just mention for folks who are operating malls or other facilities, there are some vendors like Volta that do offer free charging stations to an extent. And so I did post that. And we do have other incentives listed on our page. Next slide. Just happy to be here and answer some questions. Just do want to emphasize that we have some of our bases covered now, but we will need tens of thousands of additional chargers in the years ahead. And so you could be a new addition for public level 2 charging or public DC fast charging in the decade ahead. We're all gonna need a whole lot more. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Jules, Brandon, and Alan for sharing your presentations. At this time, we will move into our Q&A session. My name is Jenna Peabody, and I'm the member of the AIRE team, and I'll be moderating the Q&A portion. So if all panelists could turn their videos back on, and if audience members have questions for the speakers, please ask them using the Q&A feature on your team's dashboard if you have not already done so. I have about 2 questions from the audience for each of you, but please feel free to supplement each other's responses with your insight. Spotlight each of you. Great. Okay, so first question, I was thinking, Brandon, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about public charging infrastructure and any planned improvements for that infrastructure and the time frame of those improvements.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. So what I want to start out by saying, I think this was a great panel, just everyone, all the other speakers. So thank you so much. So regarding the time frame, I think, Jill, you mentioned from MetLife that there's a lot of planning and property management locations looking at infrastructure upgrades. So I think the biggest delay to think about and to be aware of is that due to the pandemic and supply chain issues that happen, there's still long lead times on key infrastructure equipment such as transformers and switch gears. So when you're talking about installing at least public charging infrastructure, speaking DC fast chargers, say at malls, when you're looking at a site of 6 to 10 150 kilowatt or even the next generation 350 kilowatt chargers, you're approaching megawatt level power, and a megawatt it's high. It gets the utility's attention. That's because kilowatts and megawatts. So it's enough to where you need switch gears, you need battery backup. That's what makes the grid resilient. So the key thing that I'm pointing all that out is some of the lead times had gotten to 80 weeks easy. Like that's like the lowest you might see, but some had already gotten close to 2 years. So the worst time, it was potentially up to 2 years just to get a transformer. Now the good thing is that if you are interested in this, you want to get in the planning phase as soon as possible. So bring together an internal team, understand what you're wanting, what you're interested in, reach out to different resources, reach out to CalStart, who's the lead for Charge at Work. The Charge at Work site has a number of other resources. Reach out to MetLife and Clean Cities. There's tons of resources out there, but the key thing is to get started, understand the requirements by your permitting authorities, And basically, as you go through that stage, getting the ball rolling helps prepare for those long lead time items for these infrastructure upgrades. That's one of the most important things that comes to mind. But happy to explain more or pass it on to the other panelists.
And I would just chime in that a lot of these federal investments were laid out in statute with like very tight, lean tightropes that specific people have to walk through. So first, the states hired new people to specifically address this piece, and then they've gone out to request for proposals. And some of that work is going to happen on a sequence that might take 5 years for some of that infrastructure to complete. What's great is that there is also already a phenomenal spread of this transportation infrastructure in all communities in the Commonwealth of Virginia and in the region, and that spread just needs to keep spreading out. So we didn't show too many maps of these chargers, but they are very locatable. I'll make a plug for a website called Plug Share that does detail those chargers. There's also the Alternative Fuel Data Center has another map as well. So.
And I would echo both of the other speakers' points too. Really, when it comes to this, as well as any other kind of project, especially ones that require utility collaboration, planning and lead time are so key. We have, I mean, not in Virginia, but like even very recently, a site in Massachusetts was just told that we had, I think, 78-week lead time for switchgear equipment in order to have a transformer resized as well there. So those lead times that Brandon mentioned are very, very real. And also too, just echoing everything around tax credit opportunities and rebates and incentives. I know for us, we like to first, as we're budgeting for this kind of equipment, we find that it's best to assume that we won't get any kind of grant or rebate or maybe even a tax credit, just to be more conservative. And then if we do get to take advantage of those, then, you know, that's just the cherry on top. But like in a different jurisdiction, for instance, we had a site that was kind of expecting they would get 50% of the project costs covered by rebates. And then the program was on a first come, first served basis. Rebates were exhausted. Turned out that that wasn't the case. So definitely planning and being conservative in the process is very key.
Thank you. So Jules, with regards to tips for efficiently navigating the variety of commercial charging providers, particularly when traveling long distances, will charging ever become as accessible as gas stations, including standard plugs, charging hardware, and payment? And then do you know about the latest developments for these efforts?
I mean, so my background, and I'm much more knowledgeable, I would say, in the commercial real estate side of things, everything decarbonization on the building specific side. But at least from the work that I've done in this area, I mean, we have more money flowing in from the federal government to support efforts to add charging infrastructure than ever before. What really is going to be key is for grid infrastructure to be able to keep up with it in order to reach like some pretty remote areas of the grid, or even rural areas where we might own industrial buildings that right now wouldn't be able to install certain kinds of equipment if we wanted them to. I think that's really what will be key. But given the funding though from like the IIJA and the AIRE and the Inflation Reduction Act, there's been a really big push though to have charging infrastructure in areas with affordable housing, to have public charging also available to off of key highway intersections. So it's only going to get better, but it will take time.
Awesome. Alan, Brandon, if you had anything to add there, otherwise I'll move on to the next question.
I'll just emphasize that it's a requirement of the federal program for there to be a payment, like a contactless payment system on each of the federally funded chargers. They do require a network, and they require that network to be accessible with your credit card. And so if those programs operate as intended, there should be some ease with that. And then I'd also mention that all the programs were built on the federal standard, the U.S. standard charger, this CCS combo plug for DC fast charging. And then 1 year ago, Tesla began marketing their charger as a better alternative. And so all the manufacturers have now switched over to the Tesla style plug. So the standard is going to be there. If you can sort of see, there's a little standard battle. The standard for all the federal money is going to at least this, but there's going to be adapters, so the Tesla style will work for all of them, and they'll be out there. So not much to be concerned with. All of these electric cars operate on electricity that's also available at lower capacities. So, but there does need to be a lot of work for road trips. So, especially in Virginia, especially if you're traveling west, if you're traveling any direction, you do need to plan your trip, and those plans will get easier within 5 years.
One thing that you made me think of there, I loved how you pointed out those ports, and in the interim, there's going to be adapters. So those solutions will be, if you get a car today that has a CCS, the automakers have announced over the next year or two they'll adopt the NACS, the Tesla or North American Charging Standard port. So there's going to be an adapter to mitigate that. Because of a lot of charging stations, there's going to be lead time to swap out, but it's an exciting happening. But then also, besides PlugShare, anytime I go on a very long road trip, there's an app called A Better Route Planner, and it's just that, no affiliation, but it is also charged. So I would only use it when you're taking a long trip, and you pay $4.99, you get the whole month of it. And what it does is it can integrate with your CarPlay or Android Play, and you update your range, and it gives you live access, and it takes into account weather and elevation along the way. So that's what they mean by a better route planner. It's going to really be able to help you dial in where to find chargers along your route. But that's for like a long road trip. If you really want to plan it out, I'd recommend checking that app out. Day driving, weekend driving, PlugShare is an amazing option.
Thank you. So that kind of ties into real experiences to try when taking an EV road trip. Alan, I know you said you are an EV owner. So as an owner, how much can you plan ahead? Because of chargers, what if when you're there, they're occupied or broken? How much longer does a road trip take because of charging, waiting for chargers, finding alternate stations like Brandon just mentioned, because some might be occupied?
So first, I drove a first generation Nissan Leaf for my first vehicle, and then my second one was a Chevrolet Bolt. Those are not road trip vehicles. The vehicles that are coming out now, Volkswagen ID4 from the locally headquartered VW, all the Teslas, those vehicles are configured for road trips. So first, if you think that you would like to do a lot of trips, buy a Tesla or buy a vehicle that charges at 150 kilowatt hours. You want the vehicle to be able to charge quickly because the infrastructure will service that quick charging vehicle. In the interim, just buy a Tesla. Those vehicles have, in addition to the CCS network that they can use right now, there's a full network, hub to hub, that Tesla has already built out. And you pay more for the vehicles, but if you're a road tripper, absolutely do that. And then my experience 1 year ago of like driving through West Virginia, I do this every day, and I was sweating. Like I was like perspiring significantly. And then my trip was perfect, but I had to plan my exact stops, and it did add some maybe about an hour to each of the maybe 2 hours to each of the swings in my Chevrolet Bolt, which is a great community vehicle. But it does require some of those trips. Going to Richmond, going to Northern Virginia, I usually drive the car and I can find a place to charge it, or I can find a charger, and it doesn't take any longer than as if I would go in to get like a snack. So the shorter trips, 2 hours, actually fairly easy to recharge. The longer trips, we are not in a position where we have that public infrastructure yet where you can just gleefully drive anywhere. There are a lot of chargers in our community in Arlington and in Northern Virginia, in Baltimore, in Maryland, like on the East Coast, like going down to Richmond. and then that's sort of the halt. There does need to be a lot more, and that's where we've invested our money. Electrify America, Virginia's EV Go program, we invested a lot of money in Northern Virginia, securing a base load of EV chargers. And what Jules was mentioning is that the federal government is going to invest money now in other areas, so that you can have an interstate highway network with chargers every 50 miles. But it may still take 5 years for those to be built. And in West Virginia, it may take even longer. So my experience with West Virginia might still be a little stressful. I ended up charging at Harley Davidson dealerships at about half the speed that the vehicle could utilize, but it was great. I was on vacation, and it was what I wanted. So again, these are killer around town. An electric vehicle is about $1 a gallon equivalent for driving them around town, and then you plan your trips for driving them outside of the urban clusters. And for most of those trips, there will be a lot better infrastructure real soon. If you're a road tripper, get a vehicle that has a fast DC fast charging speed. You're going to have to compare that with some third-party sites, because fueleconomy.gov does not have that. And so someone just asked a good alternative to Tesla for road trips. I'll mention a few vehicles. The Ford Mustang, E-Mustang, has a good capable charging speed. The Hyundai, like the EV6, a lot of these vehicles can do 150 or 200 kilowatt fast charging. That's what you would want for a trip. You don't want my little city car.
Awesome.
One
Thank
thing-
you. Yep.
Can I add to that? Is just that, yeah, those were really great vehicle recommendations. I put them in the chat as well. And I just wanted to say that if you think about what you mentioned earlier, we don't drive too many miles per year. So that's where charging at work really does come in hand. So I drive an EV as well. It's a Hyundai Ioniq. Before the 5 and 6 came out, it has 130 miles of range. I live about 60 miles from where my main commute might be when I do go out. So I can go round trip. I stop midway to charge at a fast charger, which fits nicely in with the stop I normally want to take. But now the next gen EVs, there are 300 plus mile ranges out there, makes road trips a lot more practical. A lot of these vehicles are hitting the used market, which makes them sub $26,000. There's some I've seen on the used car websites for 26 to 30,000. And then also the average price of vehicles, Tesla dropped their Model 3 below the average price of new vehicles. So there's a lot of exciting options. But I would also just encourage people to make the jump. If you're thinking about it, you're going to get a huge cost savings on not paying for gasoline. And if you think about your driving, workplace charging, and the charger work, that's why we're also focused on that. So in the interim of project planning, the deployment of infrastructure, adding chargers to the workplace can help meet that need. But then if you do go on those long road trips and you're saving money on gas, those few times you do go, you can always rent a gasoline vehicle like we traditionally rent cars. So I just always want to remind people that there's a lot of cost savings up front to have. There's a lot of convenience, and the road trips are always an option still with renting if needed.
Awesome. Thank you. So I guess, are you worried about charging stations being compromised? Jules, I don't know if you want to start with that.
I mean, thus far, I mean, knock on wood, not that I'm aware of, we haven't had to deal with this at all. I mean, obviously, we have a pretty, we have to consider like vetting and working with our IT team and any other kind of data management team in any case, and ensuring that we have the right kind of insurance or other kind of safeguards in place too is really important. You know, we don't know what the future is going to look like, so there always could be something, but thus far, we haven't had any kind of like real threats that I'm aware of yet. I don't know, maybe Brandon or Alan have experienced that, but I've not, knock on wood.
The biggest challenge that we had was retiring the 3G cell phones. And that basically ended infrastructure rather than being replaced with new modems. So everybody's going to have to go through their own data review, and all these EV charger companies are network companies. But if you're concerned about that security, you could also do like a parking sticker with your employees or have some other system. It doesn't need to be, like a credit card reader, like a soda machine. It could be free soda or a soda agreement, like in your shared kitchen.
And on the topic of cybersecurity, there are international standards and codes that have to be met to be in compliant with deploying a lot of infrastructure. So there's ISO and IEC 15118. So I'll put that in the chat if you want to Google it. But these are international standards that define vehicle to grid communication interface and bidirectional charging and discharging. So there's a lot of thought and engineering and cybersecurity professionals that are going into this. There's standards bodies creating codes and recommendations on how to deploy charging infrastructure on the more like technical side of things with the communication protocols. And so I'm not worried about cybersecurity, like large national hack, if that might be what you're referring to. I think there's a lot of great minds behind the scenes ensuring that standards and protection protocols are in place.
Excellent. So it somewhat ties into telematics, which enables usage-based auto insurance and discounts for good driving behavior. And it refers to the collection of data from cell phone apps or dedicated device when the user is driving. Do we have enough business case analysis to fully embark on charging as a service or CAS rather than just using simple chargers or using telematics for consumption data? Um, Brandon or Alan, if you want to start with that.
So the telematics devices are very simple. And then you could even sort of like daisy chain them. So if you want to have like a car full of cell phones, that is something that you can work with your employees on. We do know a lot about these vehicles. They do have built-in telematics, and there's large scale projects where people can analyze the systems. And then as far as like integrating telematics and payment systems and all those great items. What's also cool is that we carry like a cell phone in our pocket. So most of these vehicles are initially configured for that direct pay, the direct pay unit. You can engage that with your fleet or with your communities, and so those direct pay items will be probably more convenient over time, but they're definitely there. And I'll just make one more commercial. In Virginia, we have a very high fee for electric vehicles, and you can adjust that fee by working with the mileage choice program in the Commonwealth to add one more piece of telematics to your vehicle, or to connect your manufacturer's telematics with the Commonwealth. But for Virginia residents, you can reduce your vehicle fee by signing up to the mileage choice program if you are a low mileage driver. It assumes high mileage, and it assumes that you're driving vehicles that do not exist. So there are some punishment. There's like a high fee, but you can replace that with a low fee with the baked-in telematics.
There's something that comes to mind regarding telematics is I remember when I first got my EV, I was nerding out like every single day. I would spend maybe close to an hour after a trip, like looking at, okay, what did I do? What did I do? How much power did I use? And I just want to say that does go away. So I would recommend though doing that, nerding out, having fun. It is exciting. It's a whole new paradigm. But then just know, like, at least for me, and I'm in this space every day, my interest not only like waned, but the cooler part, this is what I wanted to point out is, you know how when we have gasoline vehicles, we understand things like, oh, if I put $10 in this tank, I know how far I'm going to get. Those intuitions and that conception of what $10 means for range, that intuition takes some time to build up on the electric side. But I was blown away with when you do pay attention and you do look at those telematics and you start to understand how many miles per kilowatt hour you can get, which might be an equivalent to miles per gallon, or how many watt hours per mile you're using. Those are all different efficiency metrics. As you start to build a sense of intuition for that, you'll really understand like, oh, I can stop here. I remember that charge is there. I can plug in for 10, 15 minutes. I now know like my road trips similar to how it was with a gasoline vehicle, which I just want to point out. What I ended up learning was we have 10 to 16 years of our first years of life absorbing all that material by watching our parents and friends, and then our first car that we get. So we've absorbed like 16 years of knowledge to build a foundation where all that stuff, when we turn 16 or 20, get a new car, we just know it automatically. How many miles per gallon we get, how much $20 will get you. It takes maybe 6 to 12 months to build that same intuition, but I was very surprised that, because it's wild, it's electricity, but you start to get a sense of, okay, 150 kilowatt charger, 28 to 30, 50 kilowatt hour battery, how much range can I get? And I think that's the cooler part, where that discussion of telematics and needing to know everything, you kind of stop monitoring it as much.
And I'll just chime in.
Thank you.
I'll
Thank
chime
you.
in.
I have to say, we are at time. I really appreciate your insight. Alan, if you did want to follow up with us, we can absolutely provide it to the audience after the webinar. There are some more questions, but thank you, panelists, for your responses. We are super grateful for your expert insight into the commercial sector for EVs. And thank you to our audience members for joining us today and for your questions. If we did not get to your question, we will plan to follow up via email with responses as well as additional EV resources. Lastly, we invite you all to join us for our next webinar, Into the Future, Innovative EV Technology, on November 14th from 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. You can learn more and register on our AIRE event page. This concludes our On the Town Commercial EV Charging webinar. Thank you all so much for joining.